The first 2 years of Alex and Laura's marriage had been good, really good. They had always been ambitious, each with dreams of building careers that meant something. Alex worked as a freelance designer, balancing the freedom he craved with the financial stability he wanted for their future. Laura, on the other hand, was corporate-minded, climbing her way through a major tech firm with drive and determination. They were different, but it worked. Laura's ambition was one of the things Alex loved most about her. In those early years, they'd supported each other's dreams without hesitation. When he had a deadline, she'd bring him coffee and work beside him on her laptop. And when she needed advice on a presentation, he'd be the first to brainstorm with her, helping her frame her points. They were a team. But as she advanced in her career, things changed. When Laura got promoted to project lead under Todd, her new boss, she started spending longer hours at the office, always talking about the challenges of her new role, the pressure, and the need to work closely with Todd. She started missing family dinners, texting him to eat without her, because she was stuck in meetings Alex didn't mind, at first. He knew the pressure of wanting to succeed, and Laura's job came with heavy responsibilities. Yet the changes went beyond work hours. Laura grew secretive about her phone. She'd always been open with him, letting her phone sit around the house wherever, often unlocked. But now she kept it close, always checking it if it buzzed, quickly turning off notifications. Alex brushed off the initial discomfort, but the unease lingered, lurking in the back of his mind, whispering that something was wrong. Their once easy, open conversations turned stilted. When he'd ask about her day, her answers felt rehearsed, as though she were only giving him half the story. And that's when Todd started creeping into their lives more frequently. It was a name she dropped here and there, always with admiration. He was brilliant, she'd say, and he just gets it. She shared inside jokes from the office that Alex had never heard, little laughs and anecdotes about how clever Todd was. The familiarity of it nagged at him, but he tried not to let his insecurities show. One night, after yet another work evening for Laura, Alex decided to broach the subject. "Seems like Todd's become a big part of your life," he said, keeping his tone light but his eyes on her face. Laura paused, looking up from her phone, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she shrugged and said, "He's my boss, Alex. I spend a lot of time with him. It's work." The answer satisfied him for only a moment. But the feeling of unease, that hint of distance, remained. Weeks later, Laura brought up her upcoming business trip at dinner. It was a typical Wednesday, the type of night where they'd cook together in silence, exchanging little jokes while chopping vegetables. But that evening, Laura was unusually quiet, watching her phone and checking the time. Halfway through dinner, she put her fork down and took a breath. "I need to tell you something," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm going to Lakewood for a business trip. It's with Todd, just for a couple of days." Alex felt his stomach clench. Lakewood was barely 2 hours away. There was no need to stay overnight. He forced himself to stay calm, not wanting to jump to conclusions. He tried to ask his questions as casually as possible, as if he were simply interested. "Lakewood? Isn't that close enough to do in a day?" he asked, picking up his glass of water. Laura rolled her eyes slightly. "Alex, it's easier if we stay overnight so we can focus on work and not worry about driving back late. Todd and I will be meeting with clients, and there's a lot to prepare for. We'll probably be in the hotel most of the time anyway." The mention of Todd, his constant presence in her life, sent a small jolt through him. But he didn't want to look unreasonable. He knew work trips happened. It was probably nothing, right? He nodded slowly, trying to make himself believe it was no big deal. "All right, well, just let me know if you need anything while you're gone." Laura gave him a quick smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, Alex. It's just work." But as they cleaned up after dinner, the feeling of doubt lingered. He could see the lightness in her step, the little spark in her eyes as she packed that night. It was a side of Laura he hadn't seen in a while, a kind of anticipation that made him question just what she was looking forward to. As she packed her suitcase, humming softly to herself, Alex sat on the bed, watching her, feeling 1,000 questions he was too afraid to ask pressing on his chest. Was it really just work, or was she hiding something more? The day after she left, Alex found himself restless, pacing around their small apartment, checking his phone every few minutes. He hated the feeling that had settled over him, a heavy mixture of dread and distrust. Laura had been the one constant in his life, the one person he thought he could always trust. But now doubt gnawed at him, relentless and unyielding. To distract himself, he logged onto social media. Scrolling through his feed mindlessly, he came across Laura's profile. Todd had commented on nearly every recent post she'd made, liking her pictures and leaving remarks that felt uncomfortably familiar. He noticed, for the first time, that Todd seemed to comment more often than her other friends, small, flirty comments here and there that didn't sit right with him. One comment, in particular, caught his eye: a picture of Laura at a company event. She was laughing, looking away from the camera, and Todd had commented, looking sharp, "Who knew work could be this fun?" with a winking emoji. It seemed innocent enough, but given her secrecy lately, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that there was more behind it. Curiosity and suspicion getting the better of him, he decided to reach out to a mutual friend, James, who worked in the same building as Laura. He texted casually, trying not to sound accusatory. "Hey James, just curious, does Laura's team do a lot of trips with just two people?" James replied after a few minutes, "Not usually. Most of their trips are local or handled by a bigger group, and I thought she was more of an office role now." "Why do you ask?" Alex's heart sank. If her trip wasn't typical for her position, then what reason did she have to go? The answer only deepened his suspicions, leaving him more certain that Laura's business trip had little to do with work. The unease in Alex's stomach grew into something dark and heavy, pulling at him every time he thought of her away in that hotel. If he was going to find out the truth, he needed something concrete, something Laura couldn't deny. He decided to check their shared bank account, an action he'd never considered before. But tonight, his fear of what he might find was overshadowed by the need to know. He logged into the account, his hands cold and clammy as he scrolled through the recent charges. His stomach dropped as he came across the first transaction: a hotel reservation in Lakewood. And not just any room, a suite. The charge was significant, more than necessary for a simple business trip. A second transaction caught his eye: a dinner at an upscale restaurant known for its romantic ambience. His hands trembled as he saw the line items: a meal for two, drinks, even a charge from the rooftop bar of the hotel. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't a work trip. Whatever Laura was doing in Lakewood, it was far from professional. He sat back, feeling numb. The trust he'd once had in her was unraveling, slipping through his fingers. But he wasn't done searching yet. His anger building, he logged onto the shared laptop, his heart racing as he opened her email. A wave of guilt washed over him, but he pushed it aside. She had betrayed him first. He found a confirmation email for the suite, an email she hadn't even bothered to delete. She hadn't tried to hide it, as if she assumed he would never suspect, would never be bold enough to check. Staring at the screen, Alex felt a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Every piece of evidence felt like a dagger, twisting deeper. She had made a fool of him, leaving him in the dark while she pursued whatever secret relationship she had with Todd. He took screenshots of everything, saving each piece of evidence carefully, the weight of his actions heavy on him. But the rage and betrayal spurred him on. If Laura thought she could keep this hidden, she was wrong. He would make sure she felt the full weight of her choices. And he knew exactly where to start: by reaching out to the one person who would understand his pain. He found Jenny, Todd's wife, on social media, her profile open to the public, showing a life filled with family photos and anniversary posts. The thought of hurting her felt cruel, but he knew she deserved the truth as much as he did. With a heavy heart, he began to type, his fingers trembling over the keyboard. As Alex stared at Jenny's social media profile, he felt a pang of guilt. She seemed innocent, blissfully unaware of the betrayal unfolding behind her back. Her posts were filled with moments that spoke to a life full of warmth and trust: pictures of her and Todd on vacations, her children's birthday parties, anniversary dinners. How could Todd risk all of that? How could he so carelessly betray the woman who clearly loved him? Alex knew that by telling her, he would be shattering that world. But he also knew she deserved the truth, just as much as he did. His hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he finally took a deep breath and began typing. "Hi Jenny, my name is Alex, and I'm reaching out because I recently found out some troubling things involving my wife Laura and your husband Todd. I know this may come as a shock, and I'm sorry to be the one to tell you. I just thought you deserved to know. I've attached a few things that I hope will help explain." He attached the screenshots, hotel confirmations, credit card transactions, the messages between Laura and Todd, and sent the message before he could change his mind. For a few minutes, he sat in stunned silence, watching the message sent notification and feeling the weight of his decision settle around him. It was done. There was no going back now. Just 20 minutes later, his phone chimed. It was a response from Jenny. She'd read the message. Her reply was short, filled with disbelief, sorrow, and confusion. "Is this real? Are you sure?" she asked, followed by a plea to meet in person to discuss everything. The next day, they agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, away from any prying eyes or familiar faces. As Alex walked in, he spotted her right away. Jenny was sitting by the window, her hands clasped tightly around a coffee cup, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked up as he approached, giving him a sad, tentative smile. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as he sat down across from her. Alex nodded. "I know this must be overwhelming. I wish it weren't true, but I thought you had a right to know." Jenny took a shaky breath, her eyes welling up with tears she was clearly trying to hold back. "I can't believe he would do this," she whispered, staring down at the table. "We have a family. I trusted him." The raw pain in her voice mirrored his own heartbreak, and in that moment he felt an overwhelming empathy for her. They were both victims of their partner's deceit, strangers bound together by betrayal. For the next hour, they shared stories, piecing together the timeline, confirming each other's suspicions. Jenny revealed that Todd had been working long hours for months, coming home late with excuses about work stress and deadlines. There were days he'd barely look her in the eyes, brushing her off with quick answers or a tired smile. She'd thought it was just the pressures of his job. Now, she realized he'd been hiding something much darker. "What should we do?" Jenny finally asked, looking up at Alex with a mixture of desperation and determination. "We can't just let them get away with this." Alex's mind had been racing with possibilities, but hearing Jenny say it out loud gave him the final push. "We need to confront them," he said firmly. "Not just as their spouses, but in a way that forces them to take responsibility. And given that this happened on company time, maybe we should involve their employer as well." They exchanged a knowing look. The affair wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a violation of workplace ethics. With proof in hand, they both agreed it was time for Todd and Laura to face the consequences. Over the next couple of days, Alex and Jenny worked together to set the wheels in motion. They reached out to the HR department of Laura and Todd's company, arranging a meeting with the head of HR. They were careful with their approach, sending a simple email with the subject line "urgent" regarding employee conduct. In the email, they outlined the situation professionally, attaching the screenshots and other documentation they'd gathered. They expressed their understanding of the company's policies and left the decision of how to proceed up to HR. The email was formal, objective, but unmistakably clear. HR responded within the hour, requesting that Alex and Jenny meet with them in person and bring any additional documentation they had. The company took allegations of this nature seriously, and after reviewing the evidence they'd sent, HR agreed that Todd and Laura's actions warranted an immediate investigation. Alex could feel his anger simmering beneath the surface as he prepared for the meeting. He felt some satisfaction knowing that Laura and Todd would be held accountable, but the hurt and betrayal lingered, reminding him that this was far from the victory he'd ever wanted. He thought about all the memories he and Laura had shared, the promises they'd made. Each one felt hollow now, like a ghost haunting him. On the day of the meeting, Alex met Jenny outside the corporate building. She looked nervous but resolute, her face set in determination. "Ready?" he asked, offering a reassuring nod. She took a breath, nodding back. "Let's end this." Inside, HR had arranged for a private conference room where they could speak without interruption. The HR director, a calm, professional woman named Mrs. Carson, greeted Alex and Jenny with a sympathetic nod before leading them to the room. She'd reviewed the evidence and, based on their email, had scheduled a meeting with Todd and Laura immediately following theirs. "Thank you for coming in," Mrs. Carson said as they settled into their seats. "I can only imagine how difficult this must be. We appreciate your willingness to bring this to our attention." Alex nodded, still processing the surreal weight of the moment. Jenny handed over a neatly organized folder, each piece of evidence labeled and in order. Mrs. Carson glanced through it briefly, her face remaining impassive as she took in the details. "We'll be taking this matter seriously," Mrs. Carson assured them. "We have strict policies regarding personal relationships within management, and the company's code of conduct clearly prohibits any inappropriate or undisclosed relationships that could impact the workplace environment. Based on what you've provided, it appears that both Laura and Todd have violated several aspects of our code." Alex swallowed, the words both comforting and painful. Seeing Laura's betrayal spelled out in professional terms added another layer of finality to the end of their marriage. "We'll meet with both of them shortly," Mrs. Carson continued, glancing at Jenny and Alex. "You're welcome to wait here if you'd like." Jenny looked over at Alex, then back at Mrs. Carson. "We'd like to be present," she said firmly, her voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. "They need to see what their actions have done not just to their careers but to their families." Mrs. Carson nodded. "Understood. I'll bring them in shortly." After she left, Alex and Jenny sat in tense silence, bracing themselves for what was about to unfold. The air felt heavy, electric with the weight of betrayal and anticipation. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of anger and sadness rising as he prepared to face the woman he had once trusted more than anyone. Moments later, the door opened and Laura and Todd stepped in. They halted abruptly, their faces falling when they saw Alex and Jenny sitting across the table. Laura's face drained of color, her eyes widening in shock. Todd's expression shifted from confusion to dread as he took in the sight of Jenny's cold, unwavering stare. "Please take a seat," Mrs. Carson instructed, her voice calm but firm. Laura and Todd exchanged a panicked glance, then sat down, their faces etched with a mixture of guilt and fear. Alex watched Laura closely, searching her expression for any hint of remorse, but all he saw was fear of being exposed, fear of losing control. Mrs. Carson began, her tone professional but stern. "We have received credible information indicating that both of you have engaged in an inappropriate relationship, violating company policy. In addition, there is substantial evidence showing that this relationship took place during company hours and involved misuse of company resources." Laura's lips parted as she tried to speak, her voice trembling. It's not what it looks like." Alex cut her off, his voice cold and steady. "It's exactly what it looks like, Laura. We know everything. The hotel, the dinners, the spa. You lied to me and to everyone who trusted you." Jenny joined in, her voice filled with a quiet fury. "Todd, I believed you when you said you were working late, that it was all for our family. You've made a fool out of me, of us, and for what? A cheap affair." Todd's face crumpled, his bravado dissolving. He looked at the table, unable to meet his wife's gaze. Mrs. Carson continued, her tone unchanged. "Based on the evidence we have, this matter will be addressed with disciplinary action, up to and including termination, pending further review. You will each receive a formal notification regarding our decision." The room fell silent. Todd and Laura sat in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of anger, shame, and fear. Alex felt no satisfaction in seeing them brought low, only a dull ache of betrayal that cut deeper than any reprimand or consequence. Without another word, he and Jenny rose, leaving the conference room without a backward glance. As they walked out of the building together, they shared a heavy silence, knowing that while this chapter was over, the path to healing would be a long and painful one.